I'm standing in the entrance to the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, holding my clutch purse and my invitation card, and a woman with a clipboard and a severe blonde bob is pointing me toward a side door, like I'm a delivery driver who's shown up at the wrong entrance. "The catering staff is setting up in the back," she says, not meeting my eyes. "You'll want to go that way." I open my mouth to tell her who I am, then I close it, because I already know exactly what's about to happen, and I'm about to watch her realize her mistake. My name is Emily Harrison, and I'm 56 years old. I work as a litigation paralegal at Brennan and Associates here in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing this job for 19 years, which means I've spent nearly 2 decades learning how to read a room, how to spot inconsistencies, and how to document everything. That last skill was about to become very important. My son David is 28. He's a kind man, genuinely kind, not the performative kind. He's a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. He has my mother's dark eyes and his father's laugh, and 3 months ago, he told me he was marrying someone named Catherine Voss. I was thrilled. I'd met Catherine once, briefly, at a restaurant in the Pearl District. She was lovely, blonde, polished, worked in marketing for some tech company. She had a firm handshake and excellent posture. David clearly loved her. That was enough for me. What I didn't know at that time was that Catherine came with a mother named Patricia Voss. Patricia Voss is the kind of woman who wears Chanel suits to grocery stores and has opinions about everything, delivered with the kind of certainty that suggests she's never once wondered if she might be wrong. She's the kind of woman who, when she meets you, spends the entire conversation mentally reorganizing your life based on what she thinks you should be doing. When I first met her at an engagement dinner that Patricia insisted on hosting, she asked me within 5 minutes what I did for work. I told her about my paralegal position, about the law firm, about my 19 years there. "Oh," she'd said, stirring her martini. "Do you ever think about doing something more?" That was when I should have known. But I was too busy being polite. The wedding planning happened mostly without me. I don't say that to complain. David's 30, he's an adult, and Catherine deserved to have input on her own wedding. But the planning happened in a particular orbit, and that orbit included Patricia, her event planner, a woman named Margot who wore black exclusively and communicated entirely in short, declarative sentences, and, apparently, every decision about who sat where and who was important and who was periphery. I was invited to contribute financially, of course. Patricia made that very clear. There was a parent contribution form that arrived via email, itemized. I paid $8,000 toward the event without hesitation. I just wasn't invited to have opinions about anything. Still, I wore the dress, a navy blue number I'd had tailored, something elegant but not trying too hard. I did my hair. I drove to the Riverside Hotel an hour early because I wanted to be there when David arrived. Wanted to see my son before the ceremony started. Wanted that moment of connection before everything became formal and photographed. That's when I ran into the blonde woman with the clipboard. "I'm not catering staff," I told her, very carefully, very politely. "I'm David Harrison's mother." The woman, I would later learn her name was Stephanie, and she was Patricia's personal wedding coordinator, looked at my invitation card, then at me, then back at the card. "This says you're in the family group," she said slowly, as if she was trying to solve a math problem. "But I don't have you listed in the family seating chart." "I'm his mother," I repeated. Same calm voice, the paralegal voice, the one that doesn't get emotional. "Right, yes, but..." Stephanie actually looked uncomfortable now, which was something. "Mrs. Voss, Patricia, she finalized all the seating last week. I'm not supposed to make changes." "I'm not asking you to make changes," I said. "I'm just telling you that I'm David's mother, so wherever his mother is seated, that's where I should be." Stephanie's face flushed. She actually consulted her clipboard again, as if the answer might have changed in the last 30 seconds. "Give me one moment," she said finally. I need to check with Patricia. She scurried away, leaving me standing in the entrance with my clutch and my polished nails and the slow, cold realization that this was actually going to be a situation. I had maybe 5 minutes before David arrived for pre-ceremony photos. 5 minutes to figure out whether I was going to make a scene about this or let it go. 5 minutes to decide what kind of person I was going to be today. I decided I was going to be very, very quiet, and I was going to pay very, very close attention. Stephanie came back with Patricia herself. Patricia was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly car payment. It was a soft lavender color, perfectly tailored, and she was carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from having never been told no in your adult life. "Emily," she said, and she actually reached over and touched my arm like we were old friends who'd run into each other at a Whole Foods. "So wonderful that you made it." "I love you," I thought, "because David loves you, and because your daughter is marrying my son, and because I am not going to be the reason this day has conflict in it." What I said was, "Hi, Patricia. I'm looking forward to the ceremony." "Of course you are," Patricia said, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Stephanie was just telling me about a little seating confusion. I think what happened is that you got grouped with the family catering team by accident. You know, family of vendors, that sort of thing. Totally understandable mix-up." Now I could have corrected her. I could have said, "I'm not a vendor, I'm David's mother." But I was watching her face, watching the way she wasn't quite meeting my eyes, and I was seeing something I'd seen before in depositions and office disputes. Someone who'd already decided a story and was absolutely committed to that story. "Where did you want me seated?" I asked instead. "Oh, well, the family section is completely full. We're talking parents, siblings, grandparents, all the immediate family. It's a small seating area, very exclusive, very intimate. Just the people who are really central to Catherine's life, and ours. You understand?" There was no "our" that included me in that sentence. "So," Patricia continued, "we've arranged for you to be with our catering team and some of David's colleagues from the hospital. It's actually a wonderful group, much more fun than the stuffy family table, honestly. You'll probably have a better time." I didn't say anything. Patricia's smile got a little brighter, which was the smile of someone who'd successfully rationalized something difficult into something reasonable. "Stephanie will get you situated," Patricia said. "I have to check on the flowers. They're being difficult about the arch placement." And then she was gone, floating away in her lavender dress, and I was standing there with my careful posture and my tailored navy dress, and I was just beginning to understand the enormity of what had happened here. And hey, if you haven't already, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? I love seeing where Emily's stories reach around the world. I didn't move for a moment. Stephanie was hovering nervously, waiting to see if I was going to kick up a fuss. Behind her, I could see hotel staff moving efficiently in and out of different ballrooms, and I could hear the distant sound of music being tested. "The catering team is where?" I asked, my voice steady. "The back prep kitchen," Stephanie said, relieved that I was cooperating. "I can show you the way, or you can go through the service corridor. It's actually quite close. You might even be able to help set up if you'd like." Help set up. At my own son's wedding. "That won't be necessary," I said. "But I think I'll go find David first, if that's all right." "Of course," Stephanie said, nodding too enthusiastically. "He's in the groom's preparation room. That's the second door on your left once you get through the main ballroom." I thanked her, actually thanked her, and started walking. My hands were shaking slightly, so I kept them clenched at my sides, and I focused on the feeling of my heels on the marble floor. The smell of the flowers Patricia was being difficult about. The weight of my clutch. I was not angry. Not yet. I was still in the phase where I was trying to figure out if I'd misunderstood something. I found David in a small, luxurious room designed for exactly this purpose: groom preparation. He was in his tuxedo, looking anxious the way grooms do, and his best man, a guy named Marcus, also a nurse who I liked very much, was trying to convince him that the boutonniere looked fine and didn't need to be adjusted. "Mom," David said, and his whole face changed. He stood up, came over, hugged me. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," I said, and I meant it completely and entirely. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," he admitted. "Is that normal?" "Completely normal," I said. "You're about to marry someone you love in front of a lot of people. It's supposed to feel important." We talked for a few minutes about nothing important: the weather, whether the ceremony would run on time, how Catherine was doing. Marcus made a joke about David's tie being crooked when it wasn't. Normal groom preparation room conversation. Then David said, "Hey, Mom, where's your seat? Patricia said she had you with some of the hospital staff. That should be nice, right? You know some of those people already?" And I realized that David didn't know. His mother had been demoted to catering staff, and his entire family, or maybe just Patricia, had decided not to tell him. I made a decision in that moment. I made a decision to not make this his problem today. "It's perfect," I said, and I smiled at my son, and I kissed his cheek, and I left before I could change my mind. Knock them dead out there, okay? Catherine's lucky. I hope you know that. The prep kitchen was exactly what Patricia had described it to be: a large, organized space with serving stations, warming trays, uniformed staff, and, apparently, a chair with my name printed on a place card, positioned at a table with 4 people in black and white catering uniforms. The name card said Emily Harrison, Catering Support Staff. I stood there and read it 3 times. I don't think I've ever felt that particular variety of humiliation before. It's not the same as being insulted. It's the special kind of shame that comes from understanding that someone has thought about you, has made a plan, and that plan involves putting you in a lesser category than you occupy in reality. Someone, probably Margot, the event planner, had literally printed a place card that categorized me as staff. One of the catering team members, a young woman named Keiko with kind eyes, noticed me standing there. "Are you Emily?" she asked. "Patricia said there would be someone joining us. Here, sit down. You're at a good angle to see the main table from here, and we get a better view of the cake cutting, too." I sat down. I'm not proud of that moment, but I did it. I sat down at a table with catering staff at my own son's wedding, and I smiled at Keiko, and I watched them set up for the reception. I watched the photographer set up his stations. I watched the florist add the final touches to the centerpieces. I listened to Keiko and her coworkers talk about their families and their colleges and their lives. And they were lovely people, all of them. Generous and friendly and professional. The reception started about 40 minutes later. I could hear the announcer introducing the bride and groom from where I was sitting, and I thought about David's face when he saw Catherine coming toward him. And I thought about the moment he'd hugged me, not knowing that his mother had been seated with the hired help. From where I was positioned, I had a decent view of the main family table. I could see Patricia in her lavender dress, sitting at the center, looking satisfied with everything. I could see David and Catherine, laughing with Catherine's father. I could see the photographer moving between tables, capturing moments. I could see everything, and I started paying attention in the way I'd been trained to pay attention, like I was a paralegal building a file. Like someone had just accused someone else of something, and I needed to understand every detail. Here's what I noticed. First, I noticed that Patricia had seated a woman she introduced as her dear friend Judith at the main family table. This woman was not, as far as I could tell, related to anyone. She was on the opposite end of the table from me, but I watched Judith throughout the dinner, and I noticed that Patricia's hand drifted toward hers several times. I noticed that they laughed at the same jokes, with the kind of timing that suggested they'd heard them together before. Second, I noticed that David's father, my ex-husband Richard, was seated at the main family table. Richard and I divorced when David was 12, and it was not a pleasant divorce. Richard hadn't paid child support consistently, and when David got into college, it was me who worked extra hours at the firm to help make up the difference. Richard remarried 3 years ago to a woman named Susan, and as far as I knew, he and Patricia had met for the first time at the rehearsal dinner. Third, I noticed that Catherine's brother, a man named Julian who worked in finance, was seated at the main family table. But David's sister, my daughter Michelle, was not. Michelle, who lives in Seattle, who took a personal day from her job as a middle school teacher, who drove 3 hours to be here, who was seated at what looked like the vendor table, only a few seats away from me. I didn't see Michelle until the main courses were being served. I turned and found her sitting at a table with what appeared to be hotel staff, looking small and lost in her burgundy bridesmaid dress. My hands, which I'd been keeping carefully unclenched, started shaking again. Michelle saw me and her face crumpled. She got up and came over. "Mom," she said, and she sat down next to me and she whispered, "Is this a mistake? Because I can't figure out why I'm here instead of at the family table. And nobody will explain it to me. And I've been trying not to cry because I don't want to ruin Catherine's day. But..." I put my arm around her. I pulled her close. I told her that it wasn't a mistake, and that sometimes people make choices that say more about them than they do about us, and that I loved her, and that she belonged here with me. We sat together at the catering staff table and watched the family we belonged to celebrate at a different table. That was when something shifted in me. That was when I stopped being concerned with my own dignity and became very, very concerned with what my daughter was feeling. And that was when I started to plan. Not in a vengeful way. I need to be clear about that. I didn't suddenly decide I was going to get back at Patricia or teach her a lesson. That's not the kind of person I am. What I decided was that I needed to document this, because documentation is what I know how to do. I pulled out my phone, carefully, quietly, and I took a photograph of my place card. Then I took a photograph of the seating chart that was posted near the entrance, the one that clearly showed where families should have been seated. Then I took a photograph of Michelle's seating area, and a photograph of the two of us together at the catering staff table. I asked Keiko if she had a moment, and when she stepped away from the table, I took a photograph of her in her uniform, standing near the serving station. Michelle watched me do this and didn't ask questions. "I'm going to need you to do something," I told my daughter quietly. "After the reception, I'm going to need you to write down everything that happened today. When you arrived, what Patricia said to you, where you were initially supposed to be seated, who told you to come to this table, all of it. Can you do that?" Michelle nodded, confused but trusting. She's always been like that. If I ask her to trust me, she does. Then I sat back and I finished my dinner, and I watched Patricia get progressively drunk on champagne, and I watched her put her hand on Judith's arm in a way that made a lot of things suddenly clear. And I watched my son, who I loved very much, celebrate a day that should have included his entire family. The reception lasted until nearly midnight. There were toasts. Richard's was oddly aggressive and went on too long. Catherine's father's was gracious and lovely. There was dancing. There was cake that was cut and served. I watched all of it from the catering staff table. Around 11 o'clock, Patricia came over to me. She'd had quite a lot of champagne by this point, and her movements were slightly loose. "Emily," she said, leaning against the table, "I hope you had a wonderful evening." I looked up at her. I kept my expression neutral. "I had an educational evening," I said. Patricia squinted at me, trying to determine if I'd meant that as a compliment. "Good," she said finally. "That's good. I do try to make sure everyone is comfortable." Then she wobbled away, and I never said another word to her about any of it. David and Catherine left around midnight. David hugged me goodbye without knowing that his mother had been seated with the hired help. That's the thing that bothered me most, that he didn't know. That he had no idea his sister had been demoted. That his mother had been categorized as support staff. He was happy. He was so genuinely, completely happy. That had to matter for something. Here's where I need to tell you something about my job. I work at a firm called Brennan & Associates. I've worked there for 19 years. I'm good at what I do. Not great, not exceptional. Good. Solid. Reliable. The kind of person who knows how to build a paper trail, who understands contracts, who can read through 50 pages of vendor agreements and spot the inconsistency that everyone else missed. One week after the wedding, I was in my office reviewing some documents for a family law case when something occurred to me. The Riverside Hotel has a detailed contract with all wedding vendors. I know this because my firm had worked with them before on litigation matters. That contract specifies that seating arrangements are the responsibility of the client, but that any requests for changes to contracted services, including catering staff assignments, must go through the hotel coordinator, not directly through the client. In other words, Patricia couldn't just unilaterally decide that a member of the family was going to be seated with catering staff without that decision going through official channels with the hotel. In other words, someone at the Riverside Hotel had to have agreed to this. I made a phone call. I spoke to a manager there, someone I'd worked with before on a property dispute. I explained that I was looking into a potential service issue from a wedding in November and asked if he could tell me who had made decisions about seating arrangements. The catering manager who'd been assigned to that wedding, a woman named Deborah, had left detailed notes in the hotel system. Those notes documented that Patricia had called her directly and asked her to adjust the seating to move some of the family members into alternative accommodations. When Deborah had asked for clarification, Patricia had apparently said, "I just need Emily Harrison and her daughter seated somewhere else. It's a family matter." The hotel system timestamped this call. The hotel system also showed that Deborah had flagged this request as unusual and had emailed the coordinator to confirm that it was okay for her to proceed. Stephanie, the coordinator, had approved it. I read through every note on that system, and I made copies of everything. I did this not because I was planning to sue anyone, I wasn't, but because I needed to understand exactly what had happened, and I needed documentation. Then I called my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law's name is Tom, and he's a civil rights attorney in Portland. He's scary smart, and he's worked on several high-profile discrimination cases. He also loves my son very much and has never been anything but kind to me. I asked him if he had 30 minutes to talk about something that was probably nothing, but I wanted to understand. He met me for coffee 2 days later. I brought a folder. Inside the folder was every photograph I'd taken, every note Michelle had written, every screenshot of the hotel's internal documentation, and a calm, chronological explanation of what had happened at the wedding. Tom read through it all while I drank my coffee and tried not to cry. When he was done, he set the folder down and looked at me. "This was intentional," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "I believe it was." Patricia knew exactly what she was doing. Yes. Tom picked up the folder again and flipped through a few pages. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. And that was the question, wasn't it? Here's the thing about being treated unjustly. It doesn't automatically tell you what justice looks like. I didn't want to sue Patricia. I didn't want to sue the hotel. I didn't want to hire a lawyer and take anyone to court. I didn't want drama or conflict or lawyers' letters or any of the things that would make this situation bigger and more damaging. What I wanted was for Patricia to understand that what she'd done was wrong. What I wanted was for David to know that his mother and sister had been deliberately excluded. What I wanted was for the hotel to understand that one of their vendors had colluded with a client to discriminate against family members. What I wanted was for someone to have to face what they'd done. I want to send a letter, I told Tom. Not a threatening letter, just a letter that documents what happened and makes it clear that I know what happened and that it was deliberately orchestrated. Tom smiled at me. Not a happy smile, but a knowing smile. I can do that, he said. And Emily, make sure you send copies to the hotel manager as well. Document everything, yes, but also make sure the hotel understands their liability in this situation. The letter took about 2 weeks to draft. It was 8 pages long, single-spaced, and it was written in the kind of precise, legal language that leaves no room for interpretation or misunderstanding. It outlined the timeline of events. It documented who knew what and when. It included my daughter's sworn statement about what she'd experienced. It attached copies of the hotel's internal records. It cited the hotel's service contract and Patricia's clear violation of the agreed-upon terms. It explained that I was documenting this not as a threat, but as a matter of record. Then, and this was the important part, I had Tom send copies to 3 people: Patricia Voss, the Riverside Hotel's general manager, and the Riverside Hotel's legal department. I did not send it to David. I did not send it to Catherine. That wasn't the point of the letter. I sent it to the people who'd made the decision. I got a response within 4 days. It came from the Riverside Hotel's legal department, and it was short. An apology on behalf of the hotel for their failure to follow proper protocols. An offer of compensation for the service disruption, which I declined, and a commitment to retraining their staff on the proper procedures for handling seating requests. The letter also noted that appropriate action was being taken with the external vendor coordinator, Margot, the event planner, and that their working relationship was being terminated. I didn't hear from Patricia directly, but I heard through David, casually a few weeks later, that Patricia had apparently had some kind of emotional crisis and was taking some time away, and that Catherine was upset about some family stuff that had come up. David didn't know what that family stuff was. He still doesn't, as far as I know. Michelle and I never told him. Here's what I've learned from all of this, and I think it's important to say clearly. Being wronged doesn't give you the right to do anything you want in response. There's a difference between seeking justice and seeking revenge, and that difference matters. The difference is control. The difference is documentation. The difference is keeping your actions legal and ethical and defensible, even when the other person hasn't. What Patricia did to me was cruel, and it was deliberate, and it was calculated. But what I did in response was professional. I documented. I gathered facts. I brought in someone qualified to assess the situation. I sent a letter that was clear but not threatening. And somehow, that was more powerful than anything angry I could have done, because Patricia couldn't dismiss me as being dramatic. She couldn't say I was overreacting or being sensitive or making a mountain out of a molehill. She had to face the fact that a paralegal with 19 years of experience and access to an attorney had quietly, meticulously documented her actions. She had to face the fact that her actions had left a paper trail. What she did to my daughter was unjust, and someone made her account for that. Not through screaming or confrontation or a dramatic scene, through documentation. Michelle and I still talk about the wedding sometimes. She still has her bridesmaid dress, still has the photos. We laugh about it now, or sometimes we don't, depending on the day. But what I want her to understand is that she doesn't have to accept being treated unfairly. That sometimes the most powerful response to being wronged is to be so meticulously, carefully, legally right that there's no room for the other person to defend themselves. David and Catherine are still married. They still talk about having kids. Catherine's relationship with her mother is complicated now, which I suspect is her way of saying that Patricia's actions finally caught up with her in a way that even her own daughter couldn't ignore. That's the thing about paper trails. Eventually, everyone can see them. I never had to raise my voice. I just had to be right.